So today I want to talk about 5 issues that are important for non-profit organizations in terms of compliance. Unfortunately, there are a lot of laws that have been promulgated in South Africa since 1994. I read the other day they were saying it's over 1,200 either new laws or amendment to laws, which is quite significant and onerous. I think it's important for organizations to just make sure that it is compliant, and in fact you should endeavor to act beyond compliance as an organization. But let's look at the 5 issues that I've identified. It's not a complete list, obviously not, but hopefully it will help the organization. First issue, the founding document of the organization. If it's a voluntary association, it's your constitution. For a trust, it's a trust deed. And for the company, non-profit company, it's a memorandum of incorporation. The organization must ensure that it complies with its founding document. In essence, it's a legal binding agreement between the members and the board members of the organization. And it sets out the rights and responsibilities of the organization. It also determines the boundaries of the organization, the framework within which it operates. So the organization must ensure that it complies. I recommend that you should actually bring your founding document to every meeting of the organization. So if an issue comes up, that you're clear on what you can and cannot do. Now, there's been a couple of court cases where members have taken the organization to court, and they're saying that there has been non-compliance with the founding document. So very important. Secondly, the provisions of the Non-Profit Organizations Act. Now, if your organization is registered under the NPO Act, then it must ensure that it complies with the reporting requirements. If you look at this picture, it was taken a couple of years ago. Basically, this 2 piles of these documents are letters of non-compliance that were about to be sent out at the time to non-profit organizations. Still, I think, and it's clear that there's a lot of non-compliance with the NPO requirements, under the NPO Act. So, narrative and financial reports must be submitted to the NPO Directorate, and if the organization's constitution changes, if the board members change, and if the contact details change, that should be updated with the NPO Directorate. The good news is that you can do that now online, so it's a fairly easy process if you have access to a computer and the internet, and if you have the required documents, then you should do that to avoid any negative consequences for the organization. Third area of compliance that I think is important is in terms of the Income Tax Act. Now, there are a couple of issues under the Income Tax Act that are important for non-profit organizations. I want to specifically talk about those organizations that are exempted, especially the approved public benefit organizations. You have to make sure that you comply with the conditions listed in Section 30 and Section 18A of the Income Tax Act. It is very important. Also, to keep in mind that even though the organization might be exempted from paying most of its taxes, it's not exempted from submitting tax returns. It must every year submit tax returns to SARS. And there are some detail that's required under the tax return that you shouldn't leave out, and you shouldn't delegate that function to the auditor or accountant without monitoring that the relevant information has been captured. For example, the organization must disclose how many Section 18A receipts it issued during the financial year. It must also identify, the amount of donations for which Section 18A receipts have been issued. So that's quite important, and that information is important for the South African Revenue Service as well. So, make sure that you are compliant as an organization, so that you may not lose your status. Now, both with the NPO Act and the Income Tax Act, you won't automatically lose it, because they would normally issue a compliance notice, but avoid the situation even where you have to receive a compliance notice. Another aspect of compliance is regarding the employees of the organization. There are about at least 6 laws that govern the employment relationship between the employer and the employee, and non-profit organizations are not exempted from complying with those laws. Some of them are quite onerous, but I found that often the basic requirements are not complied with by non-profit organizations. For example, the PAYE taxes. It's important for the organization to do that. If it doesn't do that, it may face penalties, and you don't want to spend donor money on penalties, and it's not about donor money, but it's about the need to be compliant with the legislation. Lastly, the Protection of Personal Information Act is about to come into operation. It's important that organizations, again non-profit organizations, you are not exempted from complying with the provisions of the Act. It's, I think, inevitable that you do collect personal information, whether it's from your beneficiaries, your stakeholders, your volunteers, employees, donors. Non-profit organizations collect personal information. If you haven't yet paid attention to the Act, then it will be important that you start paying attention to that, so that it's not only about compliance, but it's also demonstrating that you are a trustworthy organization, and that you do comply with legislation. And for example, this legislation is geared towards protecting personal information. So, if I had to trust my personal information to the organization, I want to know that you've got appropriate systems in place, and that it will be protected. It will be used for the purpose that I've given it to you, and there's basically no excuse for the organization not to be compliant. I know there are resource constraints, but these tools are aimed at helping the organization. We've got for example, a video, 30 minutes on the Protection of Personal Information Act that explains, what the organization can and should do in terms of the NPO Act. So, to sum up, there are 5 important issues. The first one is compliance with the Constitution. Second one, compliance with the provisions of the NPO Act. Third one, the Income Tax Act and conditions for tax exemption. Fourth one, employment legislation and relevant conditions. And then lastly, the Protection of Personal Information Act. As I said at the beginning, it's not a complete list, but hopefully this will help you in the journey to be compliant. Thank you.